All right, well, welcome everybody. We are getting ready for our final panel discussion of the day. We're going to be looking at cybersecurity in the world of the remote workforce. So we're going to give it a few more minutes for folks to join in. Our panelists are all ready and eager to share some fantastic tips and some great information. We're going to make sure to get everyone in. So we'll just have a few more minutes and plan to kick off promptly at 3 o'clock. There is still time for anyone who's on the app. We do have the event game that you can still participate in. We do have a game code that you'll be getting as part of this session, but there's also time throughout the rest of today to go ahead and visit any of the exhibit tables virtually that you've missed, and to go ahead and finish any of the other game code activities that you might have wanted to have an opportunity to follow up on. Again, we're just going to wait another 2 or 3 minutes, and we'll be kicking off our panel on cybersecurity in a remote workplace-driven world. So just 1 or 2 more minutes. For those of you who are entering in and joining the room, we're going to be kicking off the panel in a moment. We do appreciate everyone's involvement today and your participation in all the panel discussions, the speed networking, the pitch contest, which if you missed the elevator pitch contest, boy, I tell you, you missed something special. That was pretty entertaining. We've got some great advice coming your way. In just a minute, we're going to go ahead and kick off this panel, which is our last panel of the day. There is still speed networking that you can participate in, a 4 o'clock session after this. We'd also value any feedback. The Better Business Bureau and the State Chamber combined to join this event every year at the Delaware Network Station, but this is the first time circumstances have forced us to push it into a completely virtual environment. We'd love your feedback on how we did. Hopefully it's been compelling content, excellent networking, and an opportunity for you to continue to make connections even in a landscape that doesn't necessarily facilitate that right now. But we're going to be kicking off our final panel in just about 1 minute. We welcome everybody who's joining us from their event app, where they're logged in, and also everyone viewing from the browser. We appreciate anybody who's able to take some time out of their schedule to follow up with the panels that we put on today. It's great information, and looks like it's right about 3 o'clock. So I'm going to officially welcome everybody to our final panel for today's event, virtual conference. This panel is going to be looking at cybersecurity for remote workforces and what businesses and employees need to be paying attention to. Today's panel has been very generously sponsored by Cover and Rossiter. I'd like to introduce Wendy Rafferty from Cover and Rossiter to do just a quick introduction for her firm. We really appreciate their involvement and support in making this event a success. Wendy, over to you.
Thank you, John. Hi, everyone. I'm Wendy Rafferty, and on behalf of Cover and Rossiter, we're proud to sponsor this workshop on cybersecurity in your remote workforce. Cover and Rossiter has offered work-from-home options to our employees for nearly 20 years. So when the pandemic hit, the transition wasn't as stressful as what other companies may have experienced. That said, the challenge to keep our systems and client data secure while ensuring our team is motivated and productive while working from home is something we take very seriously each and every day. Cover and Rossiter is an award-winning, future-ready CPA advisory firm dedicated to providing high-quality advice and personalized service for our clients. We offer tax, audit, diversified accounting, and consulting services to businesses, individuals and families, nonprofit organizations and foundations, governmental agencies, and captive insurers. After this workshop, I hope you'll visit our virtual booth for informative articles, demos, and videos. Thank you to the Delaware State Chamber of Commerce and to the Better Business Bureau for this networking event. And I now turn it over to our esteemed workshop panel.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And again, we're very grateful to Cover and Rossiter for sponsoring this panel and all of our event sponsors who've made this event such a successful day. So today we're looking at a panel that's going to be focused on talking about a world in which there are larger than ever numbers of remote employees. Companies that might never ever have imagined an environment where they had their workforce remote are now in a situation where they have nearly their entire workforce remote. We're looking at some dangers that come along to that, not only to larger companies, but to smaller. And we're going to be looking at some of the answers to questions we've received about what businesses should be paying attention to, what their remote employees should be paying attention to. And we're joined by a panel of experts from, including Attorney General Kathy Jennings, Phil Ferraro from JPMorgan Chase, and Chet Sharrar from Marlette Funding. All of their bios are available in the app, so you can read about them. We'll take up any more time. I'd like to dive right into the questions. Attorney General Jennings, I'm curious what an overview of the problem looks like from your organization. If you have ability to paint a picture for us of what is happening in the state of Delaware and beyond.
Sure, John, and thank you so much for inviting me to this important program. And good afternoon, everyone. I thought it would be best to outline the problem with a couple of stories about the victimization that businesses locally have suffered. Because, you know, no one is immune from cybersecurity threats, and too many people and companies have been the victims both in Delaware and across this country. Last year, about 50,000 people were sent an alarming notice when a Delaware nonprofit discovered ransomware on its services, which encrypted critical client data until the nonprofit paid a ransom. The affected data included patient names, social security numbers, medical information, addresses, and birth dates. The company paid the ransom, although that went against the general recommendation from law enforcement. This is one of many reasons that routine file backups are so important. In April of 2017, a fraudster infiltrated a local company of approximately 40 employees and obtained all of those employees' personal information by email phishing someone in HR. The HR employee thought they were sending the company's employees' personal information to a senior employee via email. And so what I would have to say about this is no one is immune. That includes my office. The Attorney General's office has approximately 500 employees and over 280 lawyers. We are the biggest law firm in the state. And so it's critically important in our organization as well that every employee, every team member of the Attorney General's office is trained in cybersecurity, and we can talk about that in a little bit.
Thank you very much for painting what is really a terrifying picture of the reality of the world in which we're living. It's everyone's responsibility, and everybody needs to pay attention because this is a problem that has been growing and is only going to get worse. Chet, you handle this, you're on the front lines of it for Marlette Funding. Can you take us through what you see about these attacks and how your organization sets itself up to deal with them?
Yeah, absolutely, John. First, thank you for inviting me. Good afternoon, everyone. So within my role, I deal with cybersecurity on a daily basis. My team, we run an information security team. And in the context of work from home, one of the big things we worry about is social engineering. So we just heard about phishing a few moments ago. That is the one thing that keeps me up at night. And there is a lot that we can do about it. But unfortunately, you don't know what you don't know. So education is very important, but also reporting and metrics are important. So one of the things that we really focus on is metrics around some of the controls that we operate, and specifically, what do we have in place to prevent email phishing attacks? What do we have in place to make sure employees are educated? What do we have in place to ensure that, if an employee goes to a website, they're not mistakenly downloading, malicious code? So what I'd like to share with you is, so I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully this goes as planned. But what I'd like to share with you is just some metrics that we track on a monthly basis. And we report these to our senior managers just to keep them abreast of what's happening. So hopefully everyone can see this. But what we're looking at, I'm not going to go into great detail, so don't worry. But I just wanted to share with you some of the key statistics, and some of you may find it alarming. So just to give you a little bit of background, we have about 250 employees. So I'm going to start up here in the upper left-hand corner. This just shows the number of inbound emails that we received over the last 6 months. So I'll just focus on July 2020. So we received approximately 255,000 emails. Well, in those emails, we blocked right here 11 viruses and 16 malicious URLs. So that means someone received an email that had a link in it that they clicked on. And the tool that we use is called Mimecast. It detected it and blocked it before it downloaded to the employee's desktop. And then we track things like spam. And then also we track the number of email phishing attempts detected by Mimecast. So a little over 1,000 emails were stopped by Mimecast in the month of July. And then we also track the number of employee detected. Because although Mimecast does pick up a lot, it picked up over 1,000, there's still some that get through. So education, security awareness is critical. So you can see in the month of July, there were 6 that were detected by our employees that made it through the Mimecast filters. And then I'm also going to share a little bit of some of our network statistics. So, we have devices within our network, and these are pretty common Cisco Meraki equipment. It has built-in detection, and it identified in the month of July 481 files that it blocked. And then we also have other tools. We have a CASB, Cloud Access Security Broker. It detected over 70 events. And then we use other tools. This is a security as a service provider. They detected 5. And then we use another tool by Cisco called OpenDNS. And for anyone taking notes, that name of that tool is called the Umbrella Client. And what it does is it sits between the computer and the websites that users are browsing to, and it detects any type of malicious code being downloaded from that website. Well, in the month of July, it picked up 19. But if you look back over the history, you can see some of the numbers are quite large, 306 just in the month of June. And then finally, we use Sophos Endpoint Protection. This is our antivirus. And these are just some numbers around the number of detections that it finds on a monthly basis. And then finally, we also track the number of attempts to write to USB devices, and then the number of actual writes on a monthly basis. So hopefully that gives you some idea of the type of traffic that we see in actual activity. But it's important that, and I guess the thing to walk away with, it's important that you track this type of information and look at it over time, because it will certainly start giving you some type of idea as to what's happening and where do you need to focus your efforts. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and turn it back to John. Thanks, John.
Thank you for that, Chet. That that really does help paint the picture, because I don't think people necessarily realize, especially remote employees, people that aren't in information security, that people that don't work daily in front of their IT desk, what actually is the reality of the threat against their companies. And with that as the backdrop, it's important to understand that yes, we can automatically filter a lot. There's a lot that IT can do to protect your organization. But what Chet said is phishing is what keeps him up at night. Social engineering is what he worries about, because cyber criminals are very, very clever. They find ways to trick people. And so I'd like to ask Phil if you could give us an overview of maybe some of what we should be looking for and some best practices that we can share with our viewers today, specifically starting with identifying fraudulent emails that come in.
Absolutely. Thank you, John. I appreciate it. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Let me first start by saying that these cyber criminals are very good at what they do. I mean, they have the technical capabilities to hack through our firewalls and our websites. it takes time and they take a chance on being caught or stopped. The primary method of attack for more than 90% of these cyber criminals is through phishing. Whether it's a ransomware attack, as you've heard, the Attorney General mentioned about the ransomware or business email compromise attack, it typically starts with a phishing email, right? Because it's very easy and very fast for these cyber criminals to just send out wave after wave of phishing email that either contains an attachment that has malware, or short for malicious software, think of it as a virus, right, that's embedded within the attachment, or there's a link in the email, just exactly what Chet was talking about just a second ago, that goes to a website where the malware will download to the user's systems. So here's some warning signs on how to identify phishing email. First, the from address might have a suspicious name. Could be someone you've never heard of, or maybe just a bunch of letters and numbers that don't make any sense, or it could even be the name of someone that you know at work, but it looks like it's coming from an external mail or email account like their Gmail or Hotmail. Right? Second, the subject line. It may not specify the purpose of the email. The subject line could be blank, or maybe something that just doesn't make sense. And then third, and this is probably one of the most important areas, is there are multiple grammar and spelling mistakes in the body of the email. Right? This is one of the most common things that we see in phishing, and also the easiest for people to recognize. Right? Because phishing are often created by non-native US speakers, and so they create fish that, when you're reading it, it just doesn't sound right. Another thing is urgent or authoritative language. We see this one quite often as well, where the fish urges or demands that you take some type of action immediately, or there's going to be some kind of consequence to you. Right? And fifth, the link in the email hides its origin. So what I mean by this is say, it might say something like, for more information, click here. And all you see are the words, click here. That's the hypertext link that goes to the malicious site. So what you can do is just hover your mouse over the link, right? Don't click on it. Just hover your mouse, and then within about a second, there'll be a little pop-up, and that shows you the link in the full web address. Right? So here's some other tips to remember. Do not assume a request is genuine just because the requester knows some information about you or your company. The first step that these cyber criminals do is reconnaissance on the internet, and especially on social media, to gather as much information as they can about you, your company, even your family members. Now, second, look out for email domains that look like yours. Fraudsters, they can use what we call look-alike domains to pose as your coworkers. Right? Since the COVID-19 pandemic started, we've literally seen thousands and thousands of fake domains that have been created. Another thing that these malicious actors do is they create domains that have a very similar name to the domain of the company that they're going to attack. For example, they might insert one extra letter, or they might remove a letter, so it looks really similar to your company. Right? And then third, always confirm the identity of a requester, especially when they're requesting money or changing their banking details, and do this through an alternative verification method. Pick up the phone, call the person or the company directly on a known good number that you've used in the past, and please don't use a number that's listed in that email. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, just be cautious when clicking on any links or opening any attachments, especially from someone that you don't know.
That's great advice, and it's horrifying to think that 90% of cyber incidents start that way, and yet, there is still not nearly enough training done to educate people about it. Now, you mentioned something called business email compromise, BEC. Are there things a business can do to ensure that they're less likely to be a victim to that specific kind of email compromise, or that kind of attack?
Yes, John, there are. That's a great question. So business email compromise is a type of attack in which a hacker gains access to a business email account, typically following a successful phishing or spear phishing attack. And then they emulate the identity of the account that they just compromised, or they'll even impersonate a C-suite executive, for example, the CEO or the CFO, or maybe the owner of the business. Next, the cyber criminal sends an email to an employee, typically in the finance department. They really like to go after the accounting and finance, or the accounts payable people within the organization, with instructions to pay a known vendor, a vendor that your company normally uses, right, except that the banking transfer information is different, and and then the funds end up going into the hacker's bank account, right? The FBI reported recently that there were over $1.77 billion in losses just due to BEC in 2019 alone. Now what happens is when the attacker gets in, if the attacker is able to stay undetected within a company email system, they can spend a lot of time and they're studying all facets of the organization, from the vendors to the billing systems, even the correspondence habits of executives and other employees. And then at the appropriate time, and they often like to do this when an employee who is being impersonated is going to be out of the office, the attacker will then send a bogus email to an employee in the finance department. A request is made for an immediate wire transfer, or this needs to be done by close of business today, right? And it's usually to a trusted vendor. The target employee thinks the money is being sent in the expected amount that they usually send to this vendor, but the account numbers have been changed, and then the transfer is actually being deposited in the account controlled by the criminal group. If the money fraud fails to be spotted in a timely manner, the funds can often be close to impossible to recover due to any number of laundering techniques that cyber criminals use to transfer the funds out into other accounts, and they do this really pretty quickly. This is why it's so important for all businesses to have multiple checks and verifications for all transactions, particularly over a certain amount that you determine in your company is the appropriate level, or for all changes to a transaction detail such as banking information, right? Don't reply to the emails I mentioned earlier. Call the vendor on a known good number to verify all changes and all banking information.
Those are great tips and thorough, and it's things that people need to hear again and again for sure. Chet, with Marlette, how do you do this sort of training? What do you do with your remote workforce to make sure that they have, the awareness of this issue and that they're properly trained?
Sure. Well, being a financial technology company, we have certain regulations we do have to comply with. So we offer annual, security awareness training. It's mandatory, but that's really not enough. So we really try to focus on getting our users involved and making them part of the solution to the issue. So we've tried to do that through the use of several different tools. I'll just name a couple. One is called Ninjio, and Ninjio, it's a fun, animated, gamified way to get people engaged. They're short 2.5-minute videos, but they're very topical. They're usually about something that's happening in the news right now. Ransomware, as well as just phishing in general. You name any of the big news stories that we've seen in the last 12 months, they've had some type of coverage of that. But so that's fun. It's gamified. The users get engaged. They want to score points because they successfully completed it, and they identified whatever the task was that the animation calls out. But then we also use a tool to do more testing. So we have an automated tool that we use on a monthly basis to send out phishing emails. And of course, users are very excited about identifying them. So if they identify them right, they score points. If they don't identify them right, they're forced to take some type of education. So usually it's pretty light, but we don't want to make it heavy because we want people to be engaged. But the important thing is that we have to get the users engaged. The users have to be aware and constantly looking for it. So that's what we try to do. But then, and then on the back end, we're very vigilant, making sure that the desktops are up to date. One of the best things you can do is just simply, whenever there's an update for your operating system, whether you have a Windows or a Mac, what have you, install it, update it, make sure your machine's up to date. Do you have antivirus installed? And if you do, does it have regular updates? So those are the kind of things that we constantly talk to our end users about. So I think, all in all, education is important, but it's got to be reinforced, and it's got to be something that's engaging. If it's just the annual, 50 question, 20-minute, security awareness, module that everyone has to go through, yeah, it sticks for a little bit, but that's not something that's going to be, we can work with, if you will.
That's great advice. And yeah, I mean, every business should internalize that. It's not enough to just check the box and say, oh, we did cybersecurity training, we did phishing training, you're done. Kathy, I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about how your office responds on behalf of consumers when hackers do breach a business's security measures.
Sure. Our office handles outreach in three ways, frankly. One is educating proactively through our consumer protection unit, the investor protection unit, and the Department of Justice's social media channels. Awareness and prevention are far more effective, as Chet just mentioned, are far more effective than reaction. And so we place a high priority on meeting people where they are and making sure they know about scams in advance and how to protect themselves. Secondly, we ensure transparency by publishing on our website a list of data breaches reported to our office. State law requires any person who conducts business in Delaware and who maintains personal information of Delaware residents to notify those residents when their personal information has been subject to a data security breach. When a breach affects more than 500 people, they are required by state law to notify us, the Department of Justice. And finally, we seek accountability on behalf of consumers through our fraud division and the consumer protection unit within that division. We have, for example, secured restitution for Delawareans who suffered material or financial harm as a result of a data breach, most notably in last year's $600 million Equifax settlement. That's what our office is here to do. It's part of why it's so important for businesses to take cybersecurity seriously. And I agree with Phil and Chet, education is critical. The 500 employees within the Delaware Attorney General's office are required to do those trainings that Chet mentioned and to keep up to date on breaches. Whenever there is a breach that our IT department learns about, a bulletin goes out generally to everybody immediately to catch that, because it just takes one of our 500 people who are part of our great team to do the action that enables phishing to occur. And so it always requires an action on the part of an employee. And I think it's just critically important that we stay on top of it, both as the AG's office and in our role protecting consumers in Delaware.
We're very grateful to have that outreach and that assistance. You know, the entire scope of the problem is so large, it's easy for especially smaller organizations to get overwhelmed by it, you know, especially against the backdrop of the pandemic and with trying to, you know, realize what a remote workforce even looks like for some organizations. Sometimes looking at the risks that are there, it can be overwhelming, and a lot of small businesses don't even know where to start. Phil, I'm curious, what would you say to that small business, you know, that is trying to figure out where to even begin to try to take the steps to be protected? What can a potentially overwhelmed business do first?
Yeah, thanks, John. I mean, and you've heard it. You've heard it from the Attorney General. You heard it from Chet. You've heard it from John. I just can't emphasize enough that it's education, right? Educating all your employees to understand about phishing emails, what they are. I think Chet mentioned also that he has a third-party company that runs phishing tests on a regular basis, right? This is a really good practice for all businesses to be able to do this for all their employees, 100% of the company, and do it on a regular basis, right? Your cybersecurity training, it can't just be a one and done, right? It has to be a recurring throughout the year on a regular basis, because you want to develop a strong security culture, you know, in the business. And now hackers, another thing you consider is hackers can crack most passwords which are short and not complex, like dictionary words or standard numerical sequence of dates, right? So employers should ensure that their employees change their passwords regularly, but ensure that you have a company password policy, right? Require the passwords to be longer, not shorter, and use a passphrase or the name of a song or a book, right? And make them complex, not simple, Right? Use all 4 characteristics, security characteristics like upper and lowercase letters, as well as numbers and special characters. Right? When you're doing your training, make sure your employees understand that they must not use the same passwords at work that they use at home. Let's say, for example, your receptionist, right? If they're using the same password at work and all the sites that he or she uses personally and one of those sites is compromised, then a hacker could easily break into their work account and then potentially access the rest of the company network. You may even want to consider using a password management tool for your organizations. There's many good password managers out there, and several of them offer an enterprise version, which can help you with access control and implementing strong passwords. Now, as more small businesses allow for flexible work arrangements, right? Employees are increasingly working from home or a remote location. However, working remotely can pose unique challenges to a secure work environment and leave it vulnerable to breach or loss of company or client data. Right? A strong cyber posture, it's vital as small businesses continue to be targets for cyber attack, particularly when staff are working remotely. Right? So small businesses may have varying needs and policies for remote work, and this includes whether employees have company-issued equipment or they're using personal devices to access work. Right? Each small business should work closely with its technology department or its managed technology provider to ensure the right technical controls are in place to protect important data and processes. Now, your methods for working securely from home depends on if you're working from a company-owned device or if you're accessing information from a personal device. In either case, the company needs to make sure that it sets up its employees with a secure access solution. So let's take a look at accessing a company remotely with a company-owned device. Right? Remote access, and we are working from home, so you can all hear my wonderful little guard dog, my 15-pound dog, my golden doodle, protecting me, so I'm safe on this call. But anyway, so remote access to company resources can be provided to employees in various configurations. But if it's not implemented correctly, it can put the business at risk. Virtual private networks, or VPN access, should only be permitted on company-issued laptops, and it must be managed by your company IT staff or third-party IT providers. Because this type of VPN connection allowed on a personal device can actually expose a company to, or the company's network to cyber risk, as the personal device may not have the sufficient protection, security protection from things like malware and other types of threats. And devices with a VPN should also have a centrally managed antivirus, anti-malware software that cannot be disabled by the user, and also requires health checks that will allow the VPN access if the device is not up to date, or it prevents VPN access if the device is not up to date and protected adequately. So in other words, the VPN service checks your system that's connecting to make sure that you have all the required antivirus, anti-malware updates before it allows access into the network. Right? Now let's look at remote access from personal devices. If employees can only work remotely with a personal device, then a remote access service can be utilized to connect them with a virtual desktop that is within the office environment, along with access to shared drives and whatever other resources that they may need access to. It's often referred to either as just as a virtual desktop, or it's also called virtual desktop infrastructure, or VDI. Now, a remote access service should include, as a minimum, it should have at least 256-bit encryption for the remote session. You must have two-factor authentication, not just on VPN. In your businesses, you need to have two-factor authentication on everything. Access to the network, email, everything, right? Two-factor can really, really protect your business. And then also for your remote access sessions, have a capability to limit file transfer and printing functionality. Like, you don't want people to be able to connect to the network and then download information, printing and all those type of things, right? It's just a good data loss prevention capability to have. And finally, there's 3 more important areas to consider when you're using a company-owned or a personal device. Right? The first one is you have to have antivirus and anti-malware service on there. It's incredibly important that every device, whether it's in the office or in the home, has antivirus software installed. right? And this includes desktops, and what people often forget, tablets and mobile devices as well, right? And of course, your laptops as well. People always forget about the tablets and the mobile devices. All devices need to have antivirus software installed. And pick a reputable provider. Don't go out and just get the free antivirus, right? And in the office, right, you're going to need a reputable enterprise version that auto updates and does regular check-ins for all the devices in the network. Make sure everything's checking in and getting the updates. Another good one, I'll just reinforce a point that Chet made earlier. On your software and operating system, right, every device should also have the most recent and upgraded software patches to ensure that devices and accounts are secured to the greatest extent possible, right? Because these updates often address bugs, viruses, and known vulnerabilities that the cyber criminals are known to exploit, right? And so you can check for upgrades on your personal side. You can check for the upgrades and the updates in the settings function of your device. Now, within your businesses, have a policy in place that as soon as new patches are received from a vendor, that you have a process to test. First, you have to test these patches, right? Your IT and security teams will test them and then roll them out to all the applicable devices and do it in a prioritized, timely manner. And then finally, lastly, trusted sources, right? When you're installing apps or software, ensure you're downloading them from a reputable source, right? Limit the use of third-party applications and only download trusted apps, so on your mobile devices from the Apple or the Google Play Store. In your businesses, you might want to consider removing admin privileges from all users to prevent them from installing applications or other tools without those applications first being security tested by your IT team or your provider. So back.
No, that's great. No, Phil, I appreciate it. And listen, for the audience, this sounds like a lot. It is, but it's important. And if you're not, the IT person in your organization, you can still be part of the conversation to make sure that if it's a small business and there is no IT department, that the business has a remote source to provide these solutions, to make sure it's on the radar of the company leadership. But it's a big thing that people need to look at, and making sure that it's something that's high enough on the radar to deal with is something that is a big challenge for especially small businesses. So, Chet, I'd like to take sort of the same general question that Phil just took and look at where's the starting point for a small business? What are the things that they need to look at immediately if they haven't already, just to take stock of how to approach this issue?
Yeah, it is kind of overwhelming, right? So you really have to take kind of a risk-based approach. And how do you do that? Well, you need to do some kind of risk assessment. So I really recommend that you go out to the FFIEC, that's the Federal Financial Institution Examination Council. They have a free assessment tool called the CAT assessment. It's the Cybersecurity Assessment Tool. Even if your company is not a financial institution, it will help you understand the highest risks to your organization, as well as the maturity level of the controls you have in your organization, no matter how big, no matter how small. So with that, you'll be able to get insights into the things that are most riskiest to you. For instance, if you have if you're not internet facing, meaning you don't have a website, you don't have people coming, to order things online, there's a whole set of risks that you don't have to worry about. So, it's kind of like taking the approach, and you can't boil the ocean. So, what should I be focused on? Well, a lot of you probably are familiar with business continuity. You can't plan for everything. But what you do plan for are the things that are most probable and the things that, could occur and what the impact would be. It's kind of the same way. It's really kind of it's self-explanatory in a way that it's common sense that, okay, well, what are the risks that face my business? And let's focus on those. So obviously, we've been talking a lot about email. We all know email is a serious threat. And we all know, possibly downloading malicious code from the internet is a possible threat. But there's other things that might impact your business, and this will help you pull those out. So I do recommend the CAT assessment, FFIEC. You can download it for free.
No, that's perfect. And an assessment like that helps a business owner look at, areas that they might be at risk beyond what you might think about. Chet's point's well taken. It's not just one thing you need to worry about, right? It could be physical security you need to worry about. It could be looking at making sure your remote workforce is understanding how they need to be careful with data and what data your organization even collects. If you're a small business owner and you don't realize that you've got all of your clients' credit cards sitting on a server, that's a problem. You need to take a stock of what's there and understand where your risks are. A question that we often get, and Kathy, I love having you on here to field this question. Who is perpetrating these scams? What is the size and scope of the organization or of the individuals that's responsible, given the incredible amounts of scam emails and social engineering schemes that are perpetrated? Can you elaborate some on what your office sees? Oh, I think you're still on mute, Kathy.
I knew I would do that at least once during this panel. Cybercrime, like all crime, happens in all shapes and sizes at times, and particularly in instances where security is lax. A teenager with a laptop and some knowledge can be a successful hacker. But there are also more organized groups that perpetrate these attacks. And as we've seen reported widely in the news, there are state actors that do it as well. The sophistication of the attacks often matches the resources available to the hacker, but we are in an age where the individual hacker does not necessarily need to be a savant. The dark web has created a black market for would-be hackers to communicate with their more experienced peers and to buy malware, ransomware, or other software that makes their attacks easier, more frequent, and harder to counter. In some, we see it come in all shapes and sizes. We have a good partnership with the United States Attorney's Office here in Delaware, and we are actively sharing information as these crimes occur. I think it's critically important that we educate people with enough vigor regularly and train people so that we minimize the number of these successful phishing attacks and hacks.
No, thank you, and thank you for painting the picture of that, because it is difficult when people get frustrated by something like an Equifax breach or a data breach. They get desensitized to it, and they feel like, oh well, my data's out there. Why should I be careful? But your company could be at risk. Your family information could be at risk. BBB likes to remind people that if you've got a folder on your computer that's name as passwords, maybe change the name, right? Maybe that's not the best, most safe thing to keep. But it does require regularly educating people about this. So in our last couple of minutes, I want to look forward. I know that none of us have a crystal ball, but Phil, could you prognosticate a little bit for us and look out maybe in the next 6 months? What do you see coming down the pipeline?
Absolutely, John. So I think that we're going to see a significant increase in the amount of ransomware attacks, not only on businesses, but even on individuals as well. One of the trends that we've been seeing lately is that the bigger, more advanced cyber criminal organizations are now offering ransomware as a service, right? They provide the malware, the training, even like YouTube videos, and the support to lesser skilled hackers who want to get into this very lucrative business. So business owners must follow the steps as we've described today, and also make sure that you're backing up all your critical and sensitive data regularly to an offsite location or maybe into the cloud. You might even consider having multiple copies of the backups in different locations, as the more sophisticated cyber criminals will try to delete or encrypt any backups that they find to increase the probability that the ransomware will be paid, or that the ransom will be paid.
No, that's great, and I appreciate you looking out there. Obviously nobody can tell what's coming, but it's on your radar, far more than it is on a lot of other people's. Chet, same question. If you were to look outwards for your organization and the threats that are occurring in the next 6 months, what is your feeling of what's coming towards us?
Yeah, well, I certainly echo Phil's sentiments. The only thing I would add to that is I think we're going to start seeing more of a turn to companies focusing on the physical security or the physical aspects of the employee working from home. So, what does that mean? Well, I work from home, I take notes. Well, what am I doing with those notes? Am I shredding them? Are there things on there that I know if I was in the office, I would have put them in a shred bin or something like that. But now that I'm working remotely, what are they doing? So, I really recommend developing some guidance for your employees that are working remotely, letting them know what they should and shouldn't be doing, and then and then asking them to acknowledge receipt of that. I think in the short term, that's going to come hard and fast. That we're going to have to start thinking about those kind of things. But then in the longer term, we're going to see companies starting to realize that, hey, to Phil's point, we really got to make sure we update our systems on a regular basis. We got to keep them patched and we got to keep them updated with the updates at home. And that's something an employee can do on their own if you don't have a mechanism to push it out. I really can't stress that enough. And in fact, that's probably the one thing you should do right after these sessions is go and make sure that your systems are updated. And then the other thing is antivirus. Make sure antivirus is installed to avoid, the other, the ransomware and the other types of malicious code that can be downloaded accidentally. Nobody means to do it on purpose.
Thank you, Chet. No, that's great. Kathy, would you like to take, a minute? Any thoughts on what might be the future in the next 6 months between all the companies that have remote workers and all of the different scams that are being perpetrated?
Sure. I'm going to go update my antivirus as soon as we're finished on my personal computer, and check a lot of other things too. But really, the future is a little bit unknown. I mean, I think we will see more attacks, more sophisticated attacks. I really worry about attacks on our government systems by other nations. That's a whole different conversation, but somewhat related. Government agencies, the Attorney General's office being one of them, we store incredibly sensitive information. And while it might not have financial value, it may have value in other ways for criminals. And so I just really worry a great deal about the attacks that may come that are highly sophisticated and that are direct threats against government agencies. So it's already happened. We've seen it all over the world. And so I think, it's incumbent upon us to stay as current as possible and as vigilant as possible as we go forward. That's the best protection: awareness and vigilance and education.
No, thank you. And I think that's something that everyone on this panel has tried to make sure. If people take nothing else away from this panel, then take away that this is everyone's job. This is going to be a problem whether you're a remote employee, whether you own a business, whether you work in IT or not. This is not your IT department's problem. This is not something that you as an individual can ignore and just assume that, I don't have anything that anybody would want to come after. But especially with the incredible number of remote workers in today's world, the risk is there, and the safety nets in some cases are a little bit less tested. You don't have the ability to walk down the hall when you get an email from your boss telling you to send a wire transfer and say, hey, did you send this? If you're remote, then you don't necessarily have that opportunity. So there are resources, and while this is kind of a scary topic, the idea isn't to terrify you into thinking there's nothing that can be done, but instead to galvanize you to take steps. Reach out to organizations like the Department of Justice. They have incredible resources available to help you. There are resources like the Better Business Bureau. Talk to your own companies about the cybersecurity things that your business needs to make sure that you are part of that solution, and to make sure that your organization is doing its best and that you personally are doing your best to prevent further victimization by the incredible wealth of fraud and scam. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for joining us today. Thank you again to Cover and Rossiter for being a sponsor of this panel. And thank you to all of our event sponsors and to all the attendees who are with us all day today. This has been a different way of doing things, but I think it's been really valuable. Hopefully you made some great connections, and we'll try to make some resources that came out of these panels available to everyone afterwards. So thank you all very much for joining us today. And those of you who are joining us in speed networking next, we'll see you there in just about 10 minutes. Otherwise, thank you everyone for tuning in for this panel today. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you.